So this will be a review and comparison video of a typical terminal bar against my heavy duty, extreme duty, indestructible terminal block, or terminal bar if you will, or neutral bar. It's called a few different names. But it's, first of all, it's probably not a direct comparison, or how can I say this? Because these are actually different, like different purposes. So this one is actually fully insulated or isolated. So each of these terminals, as you can see, it's all built on this plastic, yes, plastic bar here. And I hate plastic. I despise it. I hate who made it. And just indescribable amounts of hate towards plastic. Rubber, porcelain, glass, those are all alternative, even carbon fiber, those are all alternative materials that are much better. So first of all, my first criticism against this one is that you'd never really need a fully insulated terminal block. Why? Because there are only two types of, it's not really the right word, but let's say two types of electrical power, I guess, if you will, the positive and the negative. So there's no point in you having 2, 4, 6, 8 isolated terminals. So that's my first point. And it being all plastic, it can easily break, and I just hate plastic. This here is just much heavier duty. As you can see, the bolts are bigger. They're easier to deal with. These are all stainless. It's got a brass piece here, so good conductivity. These things, it still lasted very long because it's very thick, but it's as you can see, one bolt there just broke off. So I guess you could say that that's the bolt's fault. It's not really, the plastic piece is still there. But, these things do break. As you can see, this one here is just garbage at this point. And the reason they do, they make them fully insulated like this. So you could have like a positive here, then another positive here, then two negatives, or a negative or two positives, or whatever here. So. But that's only useful if you're having individual individual fuses. But in this case, it was actually being used as a terminal block and not a fuse block like this. But it could theoretically, it could, well, not theoretically, it could be used as a fuse block especially if you had another one of these. But again, it's just annoying because if you want to have more than one negative here, then you have to connect these individual terminals to each other. So if you want to say, for example, have a negative here and here, then you have to have your wires from your components plus one wire connecting these, and then another wire connecting it to the voltage source, or to the negative of the battery. So it just becomes a whole bunch of wires. Or, back then, when with high quality machines and with welders, for example, you'd have little tabs, mostly brass, with holes on them or slots in them so that you could connect different terminals. But then, like, here you have 8 terminals, so you'd need like 8 of these tabs at least, or, 5, depending on how many terminals you'd needed. Or, today, since those tabs aren't around anymore, you'd have 8 wires here. So it really becomes a whole unnecessary mess. And so here's a typical fuse box of the 80s, made of plastic. And it's got, so every single component in the car pretty much has different fuses for it, and different ratings, different amperage fuses. Now rewind, you go back to like 1947 and probably all the way up into 1975, the whole car would only have one fuse. Um, so some people say that was bad because, if you blew one thing, then the whole car or all the other components wouldn't work. But for me, it's much, much better because of simplicity. You're only changing one fuse and you're not having to locate the problem since it's just one fuse. And, regardless of how many fuses you have, you still have to find the wire for it. So I rather just have, a very, very high quality electrical system rather than, having that you can just use one or maybe two or three fuses at most, instead of having this here with hundreds of damn fuses and wires all over the place and a huge, complex, complicated system. If you have a good quality electrical system, that's approved by me, then you'd never need more than one fuse. And even that one fuse, it would probably stay there for 100 years because it would never blow. You can always find fault with something nowadays. But tell me, what's wrong with this here? Can you find any flaws, any weaknesses? Because I can't. The only thing that's not perfect on here is that it's not made entirely of stainless steel. So it could rust here, but surface rust, it would take more than 100 years for this to rust out completely using this thickness of material here. And you still have the brass here, so the brass is virtually, rust proof. It does get some corrosion. You get that green stuff on it, but even so, it's just surface. It never rusts out or corrodes like aluminum or regular steel. So it is an almost perfect part here. And this here, you can see it's garbage and it's overly complicated. So I just thought I'd do. I know my comparisons are rather long, but this is how I develop indestructible materials and extremely high quality parts. You need to study these things in depth and analyze every single part. So from the material to the ball to the nut, every single thing, and the big picture, the application, the downsides, the pros and cons, and